Welcome to First. I'm Nichelle Poston along with Mark Eichman and Shirley Min. A large group of concerned citizens came together last week promising to find answers to Wilmington's violent situation. Can it work?
Delaware's Muslim community believes the answer to reducing hate-fueled violence is to speak up and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
And Mark, there are a group of Delaware veterans who took a big step closer to the creation of teaching the fine art of watch repair. First, your public media news magazine starts now.
The city of Wilmington can't seem to shake its image of gun violence that seems to be out of control. An analysis last week by the Gannett newspaper chain, which includes the News Journal's work with the Associated Press, showed that children were most at risk of gun violence in Wilmington. Last Saturday, more than 300 concerned residents turned out to show they wanted to get involved and do something. The event at the Westminster Presbyterian Church featured Governor John Carney, Mayor Mike Przicki, and City Council President Hanifa Shabazz. Our first look presents a summary of their remarks.
To prevent youth violence and promote positive development means that entities working in partnership must share in the responsibility and accountability for collective impact to help our youth. Frederick Douglass famously said, "It is far easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men." Back then, he was referring children traumatized by slavery, discrimination, and Jim Crow. Today, his words are just as relevant when you consider the childhood traumas associated with divorce, the death of a parent, bullying, homelessness, having an incarcerated parent, or being a victim or witness of violence. Children with a high number of adverse experiences have a higher risk of poor health and other life outcomes than children with fewer or no adverse experiences. It is time for us to have a real conversation about working together to implement strategies and measures that will help the communities, families, and children in the Wilmington zip codes that lag behind the rest of the state in income, wealth, education, employment, safety, health, and nurture the capacity for resilience for all of our children, their families, and their communities.
In Wilmington, 2/3 of men over 18 in our 3 poor zip codes have been in prison. 77% of them will be rearrested within 3 years. 66 will be returned to prison. The governor recited some of the statistics about the performance of our kids in schools. The jobless rate in our communities is 50%. 50% of the men walking around without jobs. If I had this today, if I said there was a silver bullet somehow, I would say this: absent everything else everybody wants to do, if we don't get people working, if we don't have real jobs for people, nothing else is going to work. And I'll tell you why. Because people say to me, what would you do? How would you hire those young kids? How many young kids would you hire? I said, I wouldn't hire young kids. I'd hire their fathers. Children don't see their dads go to work every day. They don't internalize the importance of that part of who we are. So somehow, some way, Governor, you and I are going to sit down and figure this out. But we are going to figure out a way to get enough people working that working becomes normalized and a healthy rhythm be placed into our broken neighborhoods. I think there's enough blame to go around. It's time for all of us, all of those of us of good faith, to get together and get to work and solve this problem.
It's easy to kind of curse the darkness when we think about this problem in our state. It's a lot harder to light a candle. But I think everybody in this room is here today to help us light some candles instead of cursing the darkness that pervades too many neighborhoods in our city. I am more confident than ever that we can successfully address this issue. We have to, if we're going to be successful as a city and if we're going to be successful as our state. One of the reasons I'm more confident than ever, in addition to all the people who are in this sanctuary today, is because of our new mayor, our new police chief, the new energy that they bring to addressing this problem. I've known Mike Przicki as long as I've been in public service. And I know since that time we talk all the time about different public policy challenges that we face. And this is one that he cares deeply about. He was very involved in the Hope Commission, and in particular, the prison reentry services and focus that commission made its priority. He's been thinking and working on this issue for a long, long time. And I know that we're going to need partners. The state, the school districts, the city, the faith community, the advocacy community are going to have to work together if we're going to make a difference.
The highlight of the program was a person whose purpose was to also provide a level of inspiration. Father Gregory Boyle came in from Southern California. For almost 30 years, he's worked with groups of young people who he said would rather shoot each other than work together. But out of a new spirit of cooperation, he created an enterprise called Homeboy Industries.
So for 30 years, it's been the privilege of my life to have homies, many thousands of them, teach me so much. But in the last few years, they've taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them because I find that it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. But anyway, there I was in a car with two older homies, older vatos who work at Homeboy, and Manuel and Poncho, and we're driving to a school. We're going to speak at a school, and the way Manuel's in the front seat, and he gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I'd just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day was beginning. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers, and it's a tough job. I wouldn't want it because occasionally gang members can be attitudinal. So I said, what's he say? And he reads it. He goes, it's dumb. Hang on a second. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove in oncoming traffic, and we laughed so damn hard, and then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other, because I remember. And now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship.
The hope is the conversation was more of a beginning than an absolute blueprint for a solution. Before the audience broke up into discussion groups, Ashley Biden, executive director of the Delaware Center for Justice, mused out loud that a training program for Wilmington could focus on automotive repairs. We'll follow up on their progress. As we mentioned, the News Journal article on gun violence sparked a lot of conversation. It continues now with Mark and Rob Torno.
Thanks, Nichelle. Rob Torno is here for his monthly cartoon commentary, and that gun violence series really did provoke a lot of discussion, some of which you capture in this week's cartoon, as we see this guy really sort of a broken record of the problem of violence in Wilmington.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have all new leaders throughout the state, county, and city saying the same exact things. Go back 3 or 4 years when Newsweek called Wilmington Murder Town, USA. Back then, they said a lot of the same things they're saying now, but it just doesn't seem like anybody has any effective ideas to push forward to actually solve the problem, or at least stymie it a bit.
And it really is easy to say, oh, this is a problem, we need to address it. A lot harder than to spend the money to figure out what you need to do to get it done.
And I don't know if it's a mistrust between agencies, certainly the CDC has a recommendation to fund it. It'd be about $1 million, $2 million. It's a small portion of any budget. Carney has said that it's the state's responsibility, but he wants to make sure the city's going to spend it right. Meanwhile, we've done a capital gains tax removal. It's about $5 million. So the money is there. It's just a matter of having the willpower to push it through.
And there's some disconnect between the problem of violence in Wilmington and then the effort to sort of draw, say, Amazon headquarters to Wilmington and fixing the problem first.
Which is odd. You don't think they would be marketing to Amazon and trying to hide the fact they have this gun problem, right? Another issue is every time we report it, it's, oh, you're making Wilmington look bad, or oh, it's only certain parts of the city. That sort of alienates those groups and doesn't bring everybody into the problem-solving process.
He is Rob Torno. You can check him out online at newsworks.org/Delaware for more. Thanks for coming by, Rob.
No sweat.
The FBI's 2015 hate crime numbers show attacks on mosques and hate crimes against Muslims are at an all-time high since 2001 after the September 11th attacks. Since 9/11, Delaware's Muslim community has stayed largely under the radar until now, where a growing number of people in that community have found their voice.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace and blessings be upon all of you today.
Muslim Americans in Delaware rallied for unity on the steps of Legislative Hall in Dover.
There is only one race. It is the human race. And all of us are created equal in the sight of God.
Hundreds, including statewide leaders, stood in solidarity.
We are one people. We are Muslims, we are Jews, we are Christians, we are people of non-believers, we are all Delawareans.
Imam Arkham Rashid and Iram Shakit are founding members of the United Muslim Americans of Delaware. The newly formed organization hosted April's Unity Rally.
We needed a platform for a while now. And I believe that the Muslim community has been working for a while to try to unite the different mosques in the state and bring them together.
Rashid says the umbrella group will serve as a voice for the whole, adding the Muslim community is here to stay.
Anytime something happens to the Muslim community, or anytime the Muslim community want to call for statewide support, they have this network.
This is a big step for Delaware's Muslims. Shakit says culturally, the belief is work hard, do good, and stay quiet. But that Trump's hostile campaign against Muslims started the wheels of change turning.
We just did not see how important it is to step up, to be right there in the center and say, okay, now is the time. And yes, the rhetoric, of course, it pushed the agenda further. It was always in works, but we just did not see the urgency of it. Now we do.
We believe that John Carney will make an excellent governor.
Last summer, Delaware's Muslim community endorsed political candidates for the first time. Then, Muslim leaders sent an SOS to religious leaders across the state. They organized an interfaith event protesting the president's travel ban from Muslim-majority countries earlier this year.
My synagogue came out in huge numbers. We had Christians, we had the governor, both senators, our representative. Response was so quick and so heartfelt, very Delawarean.
Rabbi Michael Beals says the Muslim community's clarion call shows how far it's come.
I think the Muslim society has learned going it alone isn't a smart move, but it takes time to learn these things. I mean, the Jewish community's had a long time to learn. In 2017, we're already into our third, fourth generation in this country. And so we're much more comfortable with the media, much more comfortable with creating alliances, etc. So I think the Muslim learning curve has been a lot faster, frankly, and all the more credit to them.
Beals says Delaware Muslims showed their support when Wilmington's Jewish Community Center kept getting bomb threats. And the Jewish community returned the favor when State Senator Dave Lawson walked out of the Senate chamber during a special Muslim prayer. Lawson called the prayer despicable.
I take great exception to that. I fought for this country not to be damned by someone that comes in here and prays to their God for our demise. I think that's despicable.
Beals says no one understands better the fear and worry that comes from being scapegoated than Jewish people. So supporting Muslims is a no-brainer.
When we dehumanize people, it's very easy to eradicate them. As a Jew, that makes me frightened because that's only 70 years ago that was our story. So we have, I think, a historic responsibility when people are talking about potentiality of Muslim bans or Muslim registries. Oh my gosh, I mean, have we learned nothing?
We're going to be out there and we're going to be actively involved so that anytime anything happens and this Muslim hate rhetoric is said, everybody around us knows, no, they've been here, they've been doing all the good, and they know how to stand for themselves.
All of a sudden we have a situation where we have to be better than we are, and we have found each other.
Rabbi Beals chairs the Delaware Council of Faith-Based Partnerships and says he's grateful to President Trump for creating an environment that has led to all of these new alliances among minority religious groups. To put this in perspective, there are 12 mosques and 10,000 Muslims in the state of Delaware, making up about 1% of the state's population.
It's nearly impossible to have a conversation about education in Delaware today without talking about the poor academic performance and disciplinary problems at so many traditional public schools, especially in the city of Wilmington. With us today as our first person to discuss possible solutions is Darrell Green, head of Governor Carney's new Office of Innovation and Improvement in the Department of Education. Welcome to First.
Hi, good morning, Chris. Thank you.
Well, you gave up the assistant superintendent's job at Brandywine and you took a $19,000 pay cut to take this job. Why accept this challenge?
Well, I can actually go back and say getting an education, I knew I never was going to strike it rich to begin with, but I truly feel that it's a calling. I mean, it's something that I'm passionate about. I began my professional career teaching at Bancroft Elementary as a 6th grade teacher. I had the opportunity to teach 4th grade and become a dean of students at Stubbs. Intermediate at the time, and then I was an assistant principal and principal at Bayard before it transitioned to become a middle school. So it truly isn't about the money. It's a vocation, it's a lifelong passion for me.
Now your task is a gargantuan one. For example, at Bayard where you were, reading proficiency is 8%, math proficiency is 3%. What makes you think now you can make a difference there at schools like Bayard and other low-performing, high-poverty schools?
Yeah, and that's one measure of school success. Ultimately, I think we have to look at the schools as epicenters of the community, and how can we allow the schools to support the community as a whole. I mean, when you look at the level of trauma that those children experience within the community, when you look at community violence and the things that they experience, that becomes a microcosm in terms of what the schools ultimately see. So reading proficiency, math proficiency are issues, but those are one indicator of school success. So hopefully, with the support and working in collaboration with Cortina School District, we can work to build systems that are sustainable over time. I think that's the other thing that you see with school reform. Most often we put programs and supports in place that unfortunately aren't sustainable. They break down, systems break down, and then ultimately the children end up being the ones that suffer. So it's a holistic approach to really looking at community supports, looking at the health and well-being of the children, and then we can work on gaining the academic performance.
So at Bayard or Stubbs or Bancroft where you've been, tell our viewers about a winning strategy you've employed that's helped with performance or behavior.
Most often one of the things that I think we have to do, not only when we teach children or teach children how to read, we have to ask ourselves the question, what do the supports look like at home, and how can we as educators in schools and leaders be advocates for the very families who we have that expectation that they're going to set up homework help at home. That might be challenging for a lot of our families. So how can we help bring those supports and bring those systems? And we were able at that time, because we did use DIBELS, which is a reading indicator, we were able to have about 92% reading efficiency in terms of benchmarking with our children based on an assessment. So it's about relationships at the end of the day. How can you cultivate and have authentic, meaningful relationships with children and their families to make that connection to the academic piece?
So one phenomenon I've observed in the schools is that a lot of Delaware families are leaving the traditional public schools for choice schools or charter schools. And that leaves a lot of schools with very low capacity. Is it feasible to consolidate or close some of these buildings so taxpayer monies can be used more efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's up to what we call the LEAs, the local education agencies, to really look at their feeder patterns and how they're drawing their feeder patterns. I think from the Office of Innovation and Support is how can we help collaborate and bring that collaborative spirit, not only again to the schools themselves, but the community as a whole. Charters are a part of the community, so we have to come to that realization, and where is the collaboration? So it's really how can we get back to really grassroots, engaging the community and really working with the families who feed into those particular schools. How can we engage them and get their insight? What do they feel is working? What do they feel are other areas of support? And make some meaningful change that's going to impact it day one on the ground, as opposed to us sitting in what perceived to be our ivory towers, making decisions that really don't engage the community.
Okay. Well, it's been great speaking with you about all these formidable challenges. Darrell Green is director of the new Office of Innovation and Improvement at the Delaware Department of Education. Check out this interview in its entirety at newsworks.org/Delaware.
In a couple weeks, the first season of the refurbished fountains at Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square will come to a close. It cost $90 million to update the plumbing system that began operations in 1931. Peter Crimmins of WHYY-FM's Arts and Culture Desk reports on how the new vision fits perfectly with the creator of the fountains, Pierre DuPont.
Pierre DuPont not only ran the vast DuPont Chemical Company and managed the family fortune in the early 20th century, he also had an eye for classical European landscaping. He designed the sprawling Longwood Gardens himself, including its centerpiece water garden.
This is an engineer's garden, and that's how we often refer to it. And our fountain garden was his culminating work. Everything that he did here at Longwood was building up to this garden.
The 5-acre garden has 380 fountain jets, over 700 lights, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. 90% of this operation is underground in a network of newly dug concrete tunnels large enough to drive a truck through.
There's an extensive system of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. For example, we have almost 400,000 gallons of water that are stored in 2 separate locations in underground pump houses. And those underground water storage tanks are providing all the water for the experience here.
A fountain garden this size requires a lot of maintenance. Every time a pipe would spring a leak, workers had to dig up the garden to find the pipe, patch it up, and then replant on top of it. Due to maintenance issues, the south wall was shut down entirely 30 years ago. Water has not flowed here since the 1980s. 3 years ago, Longwood Gardens began a complete overhaul of the fountain garden to bring in state-of-the-art technology and to give workers underground access.
Now, when you see our beautiful fountains in one of the octagons, you can imagine that one of our talented maintenance people can actually go underneath that octagon to do repairs and to take care of it, and our guests will never ever know what's happening.
The system is now outfitted with new pumps, a new water reservoir, new fountain jets, but Redmond saved all the original equipment.
This is the pump house. These are all the original pumps, and look how beautiful they are.
These 18 pumps are still bolted to the ground, where they push 10,000 gallons a minute into the fountain garden for more than 80 years.
The original air compressors, the workhorses of the fountain garden, they look like old steam engines, don't they, for a train, a locomotive.
This is now a museum to show that underneath Pierre DuPont's classical European sensibility hummed the mind of an engineer.
When Mr. DuPont designed this, he designed the original fountain garden with redundancy. So there were multiple systems of pipes. And he knew that over time he would lose pipes. So by the time we closed the garden down in 2014, we were down to 1 pipe.
There have been radical improvements to the DuPont design. Now the fountain shows are controlled by computer. Some of the jets spit fire as well as water. And the underground water tanks allow the fountain to perform more often, even in winter. Nevertheless, Redmond says he's honoring the legacy of the garden's designer, Pierre DuPont.
I have no doubt that if he were standing on the overlook, looking at this garden right now, it would look the same to him. He would know this garden. But we also know that if he were here today and he was faced with having to bring new life to this garden, that he would look to the future and that he would be looking at the latest and greatest technology. And that's exactly what we did.
Peter reports the layout is almost exactly the same. One woman told Peter she brought her kids to the garden almost every week to watch the construction. She has 3 boys, and she said they enjoyed watching bulldozers pushing tons of dirt around more than the elegant flowers and water spouts. You can find Peter's work as part of the Arts and Culture Desk on WHYY-FM 90.9.
A few months ago, we brought you a story on First about a retired Baltimore cop who was trying to open a watch repair school exclusively for veterans right here in Delaware. Naysayers thought the school was a pipe dream, but after 7 years of planning and hard work, the next step in that dream took place with the school's grand opening in Odessa. The ribbon's cut and the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative in Odessa is open. Classes teaching the highly skilled art of watch repair are fully underway.
I'm thrilled to death. I'm glad to be able to change gears finally from doing all this construction work to actually making all this happen for these guys and gals. That's the important thing.
This is the only watchmaking school exclusively for veterans, disabled vets in particular, in the entire country. Jonathan Dunn is one of 6 students in the first class.
I'm more than happy to go as far as this will take me, literally in miles. So I would move to Switzerland to have my dream job if I can get it.
There's a huge demand for watchmakers, as many are retiring or dying. Watchmaking is also said to be therapeutic to those suffering from the effects of PTSD, like Dunn, who served with the Coast Guard.
The attention you have to put into repairing a watch is so large that it shuts out the outside world. Situations where there's a lot of people, I don't do quite well in, so my anxiety. But this is a lone person job, and I can listen to my music and shut off the outside world and concentrate on just my job.
This affords me the flexibility to work on my own pace, at my own leisure, like I'm retired. And that's the beauty of watchmaking.
This is just phase 1. Cannon now has his sights set on VWI's permanent facility in Middletown, yet to be built, a 28,000 square foot campus where students can live in dorms, eat, and work on their craft. Cannon says more than 300 veterans are on a waiting list to be in the next class.
And next week, the story of the Huey helicopter of the Vietnam War. They were a big part of the battlefield rescue of wounded soldiers. And we head to the movies with Patrick Stoner to talk about the impact Vietnam had on Hollywood.
It's part of our reporting in connection with Ken Burns' new documentary on Vietnam. It begins Sunday, so watch it all next week at 8 p.m. That is first for this week. We thank you for watching. For Chris Barish, Mark Eichman, and Shirley Min, I'm Nichelle Poston. Have a great week.
You know, we're all called, wherever we are in this country, to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Because no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. I have to say that I've never heard a public official, in what the mayor said, about having room for our compassion for both victim and perpetrator. That's kinship. That's what it looks like.